every one of you would agree with me that virtual reality and augmented reality is one of the biggest trends in 2016. I personally experienced virtual reality like a few weeks ago, and let me tell you, the experience was like no others. It was unforgettable, and it was even a little bit stunning. So now many companies and investors, they're eager to know more about this industry. Our next keynote speech is Exploring Future Reality. And let me introduce to you our keynote speech speaker, Justin Hendrix. Justin Hendrix is the Executive Director of NYC Media Lab. NYC Media Lab and its mission is to connect digital media and technology companies with NYC universities to explore emerging technologies. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Justin.
Thank you. Good morning. How's everybody doing? You doing well? Yeah? Yeah? I'll tell you what. Let's do something real quick while they get my presentation loaded up here. These sessions are really all about meeting someone that you don't know. So just quickly, we're going to take 1 minute to do this, but this is something I like to do. Everyone, please stand up, and please shake the hand of someone that you don't know who's right beside you. Okay, great. So I want to tell you good morning, and we can all have a seat again. We're going to talk this morning a little bit about virtual and augmented reality. We've got a great panel discussion coming up with representatives from AMD, from Samsung, and HTC. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about VR and AR and the history of those technologies and where we've got to with regard to the ecosystem. And hopefully that will be useful to you as it leads into this session with 3 companies that are some of the major players in VR and AR technology. So I am Executive Director of NYC Media Lab. You can find me on Twitter, or you can email me if you'd like more information about what we do. I'll give you a little bit of context about the Media Lab. This is our subway stop in New York City, which is at Borough Hall. I can only wish that the subways were as sparkling clean as those here in Taipei. But this is our subway stop in Brooklyn. We work out of the NYU School of Engineering in downtown Brooklyn. But we are a consortium of multiple universities in New York City. And I'll tell you a little bit about that and what it is that we do. We work really across a variety of different disciplines in emerging media technology, working at the intersection of the interests of university researchers, faculty, and students on the campuses across New York City, and the big media and communications companies that are based in New York City. As you know, New York City is a global media capital, employs over 350,000 people in media, has a burgeoning tech scene, rivaled only by Silicon Valley in the United States. And what we try to do is really to bring together the universities in New York and the media and tech industry to do exciting experiments. And so the universities that we work with range from the engineering schools like Columbia University and New York University and the City University of New York to the design schools. So the School of Visual Arts, the Pratt Institute, and the Parsons School of Design at the New School. And we try to draw all of the disciplines from those universities together into our consortium to work with the media and communications companies that are part of the consortium. And those range from big media companies like Viacom and Bloomberg and the Associated Press on to mobile operators like Singtel and Rogers and Verizon. And in general, what we're doing is working with the technologists, the product developers, the innovation executives, the ventures teams at these companies, and connecting them up with people who are developing new intellectual property, new ideas, and new startup companies on the university campuses in New York City. And what's exciting about that is that in a range of different disciplines, the interests of the universities and those of the companies are very much aligned. And I'd say that the 3 big ones that we work on are the data sciences, so any applications of data science to media and communications, the Internet of Things, and then also virtual and augmented reality. Those are three big themes that we work on and that we find that all the media and tech companies in New York City are very interested in and compelled by. And so much of what we do is designed around those three areas. So, in general, what we do try to do is to build projects at the intersection of those areas. And I'll talk to you a little bit about those. Our seed projects are activities that sort of engage companies specifically, and we've done various projects over the last year that have focused on VR and AR. In the last year, we've been working a lot with Verizon, which is obviously a mobile operator as well as a big content owner, having recently acquired AOL, America Online, the Huffington Post, and a number of other media platforms. And we've worked with them on projects that have included 360 video, live streaming platforms for 360 video, on augmented reality interfaces for robotics. Right now we're working on a project with Viacom, essentially prototyping new storytelling methods in virtual reality. How to tell stories in VR, of course, is a big topic right now, a big topic that media and content companies are trying to wrap their heads around, and one that we're working on with a variety of our partners. And those seed projects are structured experiments, essentially, by the media companies working with the universities with the goal of trying to arrive at new ideas. We also run an accelerator, a new startup generator trying to commercialize new ideas off the campuses in New York. That's called NYC Media Lab Combine. And we had a couple of teams this year that were working on topics that would be relevant to some of the themes here, from brain-computer interfaces to virtual reality to video search and other technologies. In December this year, we published a report, and it was called Exploring Future Reality. If you're interested in it, you can find it. It goes straight to my Twitter profile. It's pinned to the top there. You're welcome to read the report. What it tried to do is to look at VR and AR, at where they're at in terms of their development, and to look at the future and how they might evolve, and to ask several key questions about how the ecosystem for virtual and augmented reality would emerge. Now, we chose the phrase future reality rather than using the term virtual or augmented reality. And we borrowed that phrase from a researcher that we work with called Ken Perlin at New York University. Ken has this idea that VR and AR are not great terms. They don't really describe what we're after. They're too distinct. This idea of there's a thing called VR, there's a thing called AR, and they're exclusive. And that eventually we'll move into a different time, a different point in the evolution of these technologies where we'll need a new phrase. His idea is that eventually we'll want to have no distinction between the reality that you and I experience every day and the reality that we'll experience with digital media interfaces sort of built into that experience. So the phrase he prefers is future reality, to describe this time when it will be very fluid, very easy for us to interface with entertainment, information, and with each other in digital media in the existing world, in sort of a blended reality. But other phrases you might hear: mixed reality, blended reality, immersive reality. There's a big argument right now about what we should call these things. Now, VR and AR are in an interesting moment. Does anyone recognize this? This is a hype curve, a sort of hype curve from the Gartner consultancy. And I don't know if you can read this. It may be very difficult for you to see. But this plots the development of various technologies along the hype curve and looks at where they're at, right? So in the beginning of the curve, you have technologies that are really in this sort of innovation trigger point. They're very early stage, there's some excitement, but yet they still have some ways to go. They tend to move through what's called the peak of inflated expectations. So that's the height of the peak there. And Gartner sees a variety of different technologies at that point. from the peak of inflated expectations, they move into the trough of disillusionment. And the trough of disillusionment is where a lot of people will begin to say, well, wait a minute, what was all the hype about? You know, why were we all so excited? We saw the great demo at COMPUTEX, but really what's happened? But from there, some technologies emerge onto the slope of enlightenment and then on into the plateau of productivity. And that's where they become part of our everyday lives, and lots of fortunes are made. I don't know if you can see this very well. Those of you watching on Twitch can see it at home. But Gartner suggests that VR has entered the slope of enlightenment, okay? That we're in a new period with regard to virtual reality where the opportunity is real, the technology is mature enough that the real opportunity is being created. Augmented reality following just behind, maybe 18 months, 2 years behind, in that sort of trough, but about to turn on to the slope. But the real question is, will VR be adopted by the masses? Will an enormous number of consumers begin to use and consume virtual reality and augmented reality content? Will these devices sell in millions of units? Will the software evolve? And we've seen across the history of media that people are skeptical about new media formats. Certainly in my country, in the United States, in the West, there have been a number of people who have asked significant questions about new media technologies, often with this thought that sort of seems silly, right? And we've got lots of examples of that. If you look back at the telegraph, one of the earliest communications technologies to be developed in the 19th century, a mass communications technology. In 1842, the United States Congress was asked to provide funds for a telegraph between Baltimore and New York City. And at the time, a U.S. senator named George McDuffie challenged this absurd idea by sarcastically asking, is the telegraph going to transmit letters and newspapers? He didn't understand why anyone would want to invest in something so absurd. But of course, just 4 years later, the Associated Press was founded, and of course, we've seen news delivered electronically ever since. Then, on to the invention of radio. In 1865, another American newspaper, the Boston Post, was questioning whether radio would ever be an important communications technology. They said, quote, radio would be of no practical value because well-informed people know it is impossible to transmit the voice over wires. And of course, that sort of technical skepticism about radio was proven wrong very quickly. Then television. At an event like this, in the 1939's World Fair in New York City, the first sort of television prototypes were on display. And people were interested, but similarly skeptical. The New York Times did a review of the demonstration of TV and expressed concern on its future, saying, quote, people have to sit and keep their eyes on the screen. The average American doesn't have time for that. And of course, it's extraordinary to imagine that there was ever that sort of skepticism for television when now Americans seem to spend every waking moment looking at a screen. But we see that same sort of skepticism with regard to the web, and now with regard to VR. But the basic ideas for VR have been around for some time. And I think that what we'll see over the next few years is that the time has come for these technologies to emerge. This was an academic paper that was published by a man named Ivan Sutherland to describe a product he had built, a demonstration of a prototype called the Sword of Damocles. And this paper was actually presented at a conference as far back as 1968. So this is really the sort of first evidence or the first example of a prototype of a virtual reality experience. And you can see in Ivan's prototype the essential form factor for the head-mounted display that we see today. So if you go over and you check out the Samsung experience that's over here in the demo area, or you check out the HTC Vive experience, or some of the others that are on the floor, in some way, they are reminiscent of what Ivan had developed nearly 50 years ago. But it took some time, of course, for the various technologies that Ivan was trying to connect in that prototype to come together. This is Jaron Lanier, another pioneer of virtual reality. And this is the 1990s, fast forward to the 1990s, the first kind of moment of enthusiasm around virtual and augmented reality technology. And you could be forgiven for thinking that Jaron is holding an Oculus, a dev kit, or maybe an HTC Vive in his hand there. But this is 1993, and this is in that original moment of virtual reality enthusiasm. And of course, from that moment, there was then a trough of disillusionment and a period of winter for a lot of VR enthusiasts. But now we see the emergence of these new technologies, and the leaders are here today: Samsung, HTC, of course Oculus and Facebook. These experiences have finally kind of caught up with the display technology. They've caught up with the internet, and there's an extraordinary new groundswell of excellent content that's being developed. Some of that content is, of course, entertainment content, and some of that content or experiences are being built around enterprise applications. So looking at ways to use virtual and augmented reality to build a business. And then, of course, we're beginning to see media companies that are building VR experiences, 360 video experiences, and others, and distributing those to the masses. So the New York Times in the States has distributed well over 1 million Google Cardboard headsets to its readers, and has experimented quite a lot with various 360 videos, including this one, The Displaced, which is an award-winning 360 video on the Syrian refugee crisis. More recently, they've just put out a rendered VR experience that lets you travel to Pluto and stand on Pluto and see what the NASA probe that recently visited Pluto got to see. These are available for free in the New York Times VR app, and they've now been consumed by many thousands of people, and they're among the first examples of a big media company doing VR at scale. So I'll come back to that question. What will really drive the consumer VR explosion? That's what we were all here sort of wondering about. When will this be a scale opportunity, like television, like OTT? We sort of think, we have the hypothesis that really, ultimately, it will all be about the phone. That, and I'll be interested whether our panelists agree with this, but the phone ultimately will be the device that delivers these experiences. It's already the thing that everyone's got in their pocket. It's already the thing that everyone is using to consume content. But some things are going to change about the phone in the next few years. We know that today's phones have a bunch of components that make it possible to deliver the media and communications experience that we all have in them at the moment. The inertial measurement units, the GPUs, the small weight and form factor, the high pixel resolution that delivers content. But of course, over the next few years, you're going to see many of the capabilities that are in some of the high-end headsets that are on display here incorporated into your phone. And so those, by 2018, we expect to see phones with extremely low latency IMU integration, that will make it possible to do inside-out ground truth tracking, very important for the delivery of virtual and augmented reality content, up to 120 frames per second, low latency, higher pixel density, even faster GPU, and really, I think we'll see the phone emerge as the device that conveys VR and AR into the mainstream. And that's what's driving the estimates of the market opportunity in virtual and augmented reality. Goldman Sachs earlier this year published an equity note on the opportunity in VR and AR, and I'd encourage you all to take a look at that. looking at the global marketplace, pointing out that in the last 2 years, more than $3.5 billion in venture capital has been invested into virtual and augmented reality, estimating a $35 billion software market in AR and VR by 2025, and a combined $80 billion hardware and software market. And that was at their median estimate. Now, there was a lower case and a higher case estimate as well, but at the median suggesting around 80 billion. And of course that means numerous markets will be disrupted. And those markets, those numbers are eye-popping, you know. I think we can all agree that those are eye-popping big numbers. And they're mostly across video games, live events, video entertainment, and other categories, but also specific areas like education, retail, healthcare, military applications for virtual and augmented reality technology. Some big numbers. And of course it's gaming that will drive the revenues across VR, at least in the early stages. And I think some of the experiences that you'll see here at InnoVEX are gaming related applications. But that is what will finance. Luckily the gamers spend money on content. That's great. So that will finance the development and the rollout of much of this technology and make it possible for it to move into other areas. But of course, it's not just about the tech. And I think we'll talk about this a bit on the panel today. But in a way, you're beginning to see headlines where people are wondering whether the tech is a bit ahead of other areas of the ecosystem, particularly to do with content creation and discovery. And so that will be an area of concern over the next couple of years, because the reality is that an entire ecosystem has to emerge around virtual and augmented reality to make it a reality. And so we'll want to spend some time talking about that in the panel discussion that's to come. In the United States, it's become an industry. There are 23,000 people or so that list virtual reality on their LinkedIn profile. And I think it's fair to say that the pattern of employment and where the hotspots are in the US is very much close to what the media and advertising and tech ecosystem looks like today. New York, LA, and of course the Bay Area are leading. I'd be very interested to see these numbers for Taipei and for other Asian cities. But really, one of the big things we need now is content. We need the media ecosystem to invest in content and to create content that will bring folks along. So we're encouraging our member companies to invest and to do everything from very cheap experiments in working with VR and AR on through to investing in the hardware and software ecosystem. And so the simplest thing that many of our member companies are doing is feeding the geek, making sure that the guy or the girl who's in the office who likes to experiment with emerging media technology has access to the tools to create VR and AR experiences. And we're making sure that they go through and use those experiments. We see a lot of the companies that working with universities. It's interesting that the Vive experience over there, the Bird experience that many of you may try, is a project with a university spin-off. Lots of opportunity in partnering with universities. We're seeing many media companies partner with device makers, and we'll talk a little bit about that on the panel. And then also we're seeing them invest in the ecosystem and even building dedicated units around VR and AR. And of course, we don't know how quickly this technology will come along. There's a lot of enthusiasm, for instance, around this company, Magic Leap, a lot of secrecy, over $1 billion in venture capital invested in what those guys are doing down in Florida in the United States. And so it could be that there are some game-changing technologies that will emerge in just the next couple of years. At the F8 conference, you had Mark Zuckerberg talking about VR and AR as part of the future of Facebook, talking about the form factor for VR and AR and how more than likely it will be nothing more than simply the pair of glasses that are on your head that you'll use to interact with VR and AR content. And then of course, hopefully Celia from Samsung won't mind me mentioning this image, which was drawn and reported in the press from a patent that Samsung filed, a contact lens that essentially is for the delivery of VR content directly into the eye of the wearer. So this is where it's headed. This is where we're going. And I think that when you think about the companies that are here at COMPUTEX, at InnoVEX, when you think about the companies that we'll have on the panel here shortly, they're investing in a great deal, but there are huge opportunities in the ecosystem for startups, for middle-sized companies, for small companies to advance VR and AR technology, because we certainly we will realize the hope of these technologies in the next couple of years. But it's going to be a bit of a drunken walk, okay? So this guy, maybe he's had a few too many, he's at a soccer match or something. You can see that he makes progress forward, but with a couple of steps backwards, a couple of steps to the side. Maybe a safer way to depict it is like this. The drunken walk is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step to the side, as we all kind of try to advance this new media and communications technology together. But is it hope or is it hype? I think hope. I think we're going to hear a little bit more about that from the panel, and we look forward to the discussion with you. I'd like to thank you all for listening to me, and I think now we'll transition to our panel discussion.
Thank you, Justin. Ladies and gentlemen, your applause for Justin. And Justin, please remain on the stage for the next session.